Thank you all for coming. I'm excited to be here and speaking to you guys tonight. My name's Meera Gorjala. I'm an environmental attorney at a law firm in Chicago called ArentFox Schiff. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about what we do in our practice group in the environmental space, and a little bit about my background and how I got there in terms of undergrad and coming to Chicago for law school. I am a very informal person, so I'm happy to take questions or comments as we go. I also would get very bored if someone was droning on at me for 45 minutes straight, so feel free to interrupt with questions or anything as we go. So maybe just to start, how many of you guys are in an undergrad program here at UChicago? How many of you are in grad school? And any law students? Awesome. So I guess to start, I'll talk a little bit about my job. So I have been an associate at AFS for about 3 years. I graduated from UChicago in 2022 and have been working there ever since. I also started there as a summer associate while I was a second year in law school and then went straight through. So a little bit about AFS. We're, as you could probably tell, a private law firm. We have a number of offices in a couple of different states, but we have about a 200-person or lawyer law firm in Chicago and about 600 lawyers total nationwide. We do a little bit of work in almost every practice area. I work in the environmental and energy practice group, which is primarily based here. We work in the Sears Tower downtown. In terms of work, I think often lawyers either fall into more of a transactional bucket, so doing sort of contractual or deal work, or doing more pure litigation, working maybe you would see on TV, arguing in front of a courtroom. I think since we're a little bit more sort of industry or area focused, we do a little bit of work on both sides. So. And we do a little bit of work in the sort of regulatory compliance area as well. So on the transactional side, we help with doing due diligence for environmental issues for transactional deals. So for example, if a company wants to buy another company or another piece of land, we sort of review past compliance with environmental laws, clean air issues, water issues, land contamination issues, to sort of inform how the deal should be structured. We also sort of review contracts for similar types of concerns. We also do work in the energy space. So we've been doing a lot of work for both sort of the permitting and financing of renewables projects. I think in the recent couple of years, there's been a big push in Illinois for the development of wind and solar projects. So we've been doing some work in that space, sort of informing power purchase agreements for those types of projects, in addition to negotiating contracts for renewable energy credits, which has been, I think, a big push nationwide, but also in Illinois. Most of that work goes through the Illinois Power Agency, which has a number of incentive programs for different types of renewable projects. So that's been, I think, a good growing area of work for us. I guess on the regulatory side, we largely have sort of corporate clients, so manufacturers, other types of companies, retailers. Utilities. We largely advise them on sort of compliance with environmental laws. This can involve, they have a question about the sale of a certain product and how that complies with different environmental statutes, or, operating a manufacturing plant on a certain piece of land, that type of work. That often involves, negotiations with regulatory agencies. I think a lot of environmental statutes and regulations are relatively new compared to other statutes. So I think there's a lot of work recently in sort of just trying to evaluate the complexity of applying those in a wide variety of situations, and maybe situations that the laws weren't originally intended to regulate. So I think that's been sort of an interesting area of development. We also work on sort of permitting for different types of technologies, like I said, wind and solar projects. We've been doing some work in the carbon sequestration space that's been relatively interesting and new. I think Illinois, for example, has recently passed legislation, determining the types of permits that you need for carbon sequestration projects, which are like a way that many companies are looking at reducing their carbon emissions and storing it underground. I think there's been some delays in sort of the implementation of those permits. Not a ton have been issued just because of like the backlog that IEPA has, but we've had some clients who've been looking more into moving into that space as a way of reducing their carbon emissions. And then I think a couple of other areas that have been popping up, I think a decent amount recently, are extended producer responsibility laws. So a lot of states have recently implemented legislation that requires companies to be more involved with how like packaging and the products that they sell get disposed of or recycled after used by a consumer. So we've had a decent amount of sort of compliance work figuring out how to join organizations that can help consumers sort of dispose of those products in the best way. That's been a big push, I think, in the electric vehicle battery industry as well. In addition to another big area of work has been ESG work. So there's been a lot of, less push at the federal level, obviously, given the current administration, but there's been some state level push towards like climate disclosure of Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions for companies that do work, for example, in California and meet a certain economic threshold. Excuse me. In addition to like pushes towards evaluating sort of the risks of climate change on different companies and how that gets involved or evaluated from an investor perspective. So we've been doing some work in that area as well. Excuse me. Does anyone have any questions before I keep going? Okay, cool. And then I guess on the litigation side, we do a little bit of work, more traditionally arguing in front of a court or a regulatory body. So I think the two biggest areas that our litigation has been focused on recently is one in the sort of Superfund CERCLA realm. So CERCLA is a statute that helps like apportion costs for the remediation of large contaminated sites. And the liability under that statute is fairly broad. So it brings in like almost every company who could be, or entity who could be associated with contamination at a certain piece of property. So a lot of that work is sort of trying to gather evidence of what has happened, could be like 50 years in the past, and also sort of organizing many parties with different interests in order to remediate a site for future use. So we have a couple of cases in that arena. Those cases also tend to last for like 30 or 40 years. So I'm sure they will be ongoing for a long time. But the other, I think, big area recently has been in the renewables space. We have a few cases in different counties in Illinois about the siting of renewables projects. Illinois passed an amendment to the counties code a couple of years ago that required counties to approve siting permits for certain renewables projects if they met certain criteria. I think there's been some pushback from sort of local institutions who would rather see that land preserved for like agricultural purposes or other types of uses. So we've had a good amount of litigation on interpreting sort of what the meaning of that statute is and what, I guess, counties' leeway is to push back if they don't want solar or wind development on a certain piece of property. Those cases, I think the The earliest ones are still on appeal, so I think there's still a lot of room to be litigated at those. And Illinois has also passed another law recently that sort of strengthened the renewables developers, ability to get projects through and permitted, even despite sort of local protests for like NIMBY reasons and that type of thing. So, excuse me, that's been, I think, one growing area of work. In terms of the administrative stuff, we also have some cases in front of like state environmental regulatory agencies, so like the Pollution Control Board, for example, in Illinois. Sorry, I promise I'm not like fully typhoid Meera today. I have a little bit of a cough. So some work we've been doing there has involved, for example, we have some clients who are utilities who are like trying to evaluate what they should do with sort of the byproduct of like energy products that they've, burned or consumed to turn into fuel. So, for example, a lot of plants have like coal combustion residual deposits or ponds that they're currently evaluating how to remediate or leave in place. Excuse me. There's been some put back and forth with, I think, the federal agencies about how those situations should be handled. There's also been a decent amount of work in front of like local or state public service commissions who are, I think, on the front lines of a lot of energy issues in different states. In Illinois, it starts with the Commerce Commission. In other states, it's in Michigan, for example, it's the Michigan Public Service Commission. Most of the time, utilities have to get like programs for that they want to implement, like the rates that they charge consumers, those types of things approved by a regulatory body. And anyone who has like sort of an interested stake in those proceedings can intervene and sort of have their voices heard on that process. So there's a decent amount of work that large intervener groups can do about sort of the regulating like the generation mixes a utility uses, the rates they can charge, how they like to implement electrification projects, and other types of programs like that. So I think that's sort of like the bulk of our work in the climate energy space. Anyone have any questions? Sure.
That's pretty vast. What do you do? Like, are you working on all of these simultaneously, or can you talk about what a day in your life looks like?
Sure. So I think it really varies. It depends on like sort of what's happening with our clients and what's happening in the regulatory space. I think on the day-to-day, I usually tend to focus on like 1 to 2 cases at a time. And it sort of depends on what's going on in the case. So like, for example, today, I actually have one like non-environmental case that's been fairly busy recently. We have like some cases for insurance companies that are more sort of like Unfair Practices Act based cases. We've been in like sort of discovery battles in those cases. So today it's been more working on like motions related to that type of discovery or sort of internal meetings about how to respond to certain requests. You spend a lot of time like researching cases or laws on Westlaw. I feel like I probably go into court fairly infrequently, but if you're like a more traditional litigation attorney, maybe that you do that more often. And then I guess in terms of sort of going into work or working from home, I think different firms work different ways. We're technically supposed to be in the office 3 days a week, so we can work from home the other days of the week, and that I think has been a pretty good balance for me, but I think that's been like a shift post-pandemic for most people who are going in, 5 days a week and seeing people in the office all the time. Sure.
Do you work across multiple practice groups? I know you just mentioned that you also work with insurance, and I'm guessing you work on the litigation side.
Yeah, so different firms work different ways. At AFS, when you're a first year, you don't have to pick a practice group for a year, so most people will do projects in different groups to figure out what they like and what they don't like. So I did some litigation cases, did some antitrust work, I think, my first year. Excuse me. I think I did some private clients work as well, which I sort of valued because I think it's hard when you're starting out in the legal field to know what you want to do. There are a lot of different areas of law and a lot of different things to be exposed to. So I think other firms work different ways. Sometimes when you apply for a job, you apply to a job in a specific practice group. For example, my friend works for the products group at another law firm, and she applied directly to the group. So she only ever did products work, but like for us, it's a little bit more of a varied experience, at least for your summer and your first year. Yeah, but good question.
But now
but now I think I would probably say 70 to 80% is environmental work, and then I have a few other cases that are more traditionally litigation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious about how that transitioned.
Yeah. I think some of the cases I had my first year sort of naturally petered out. A couple of them are still active, which are the cases I'm still working on. Mm-hmm. And then some of them were there was some overlap between environmental work. For example, we do some work for the Skyway that's been sort of both more traditional litigation and involved some streets and sanitation issues that's a little more environmental focused. So I think it's sort of a mixture.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cool. I guess I can talk a little bit about my experience in college and law school, and then how I got to my career. So I originally grew up in Georgia. I had no idea what I wanted to do when I grew up, and then applied to a bunch of different schools. I ended up getting into a program at USC out in California. I liked the idea of going to a school with a big football team and a music program, and I thought I may be interested in public policy work because I was a policy debater in high school, so I ended up going to LA. I think once I got there, I started as a public policy major. I liked my classes there, and then found that I missed taking more hard math science classes, so I ended up taking some environmental courses as general education requirements, and found that I really liked them and liked the professors in that department. So I ended up adding an environmental major, and I liked sort of the aspect of those classes that was sort of a mixture of both sort of physics and chemistry and hard science and sort of more policy-oriented work. I also ended up doing a computer programming minor. Well, they didn't call it a minor at USC, but ended up taking some computer programming classes for fun. So I'd say definitely take classes and do experience in things that you wouldn't originally have thought you'd be interested in. I think while I was at USC, I also tried out jobs in a number of different areas because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I thought I might want to go to law school, but I tend to be a very action-oriented process of elimination person. So for me, I think trying out different areas really helped me narrow down what I wanted to do. I had a couple of different, I think, internships that helped me along the way. I worked for a law firm in my hometown in McDonough, Georgia for a summer. I think that process of seeing what a lawyer does day to day really helped me figure out what I wanted to do. I also did some work in a more political capacity. So I worked for a political campaign for a semester. I worked for my congressman in my hometown. And I worked for my county government, Fulton County in Georgia. And I think I liked the parts of those experiences that were more advocacy focused. I liked interaction with constituents or people experiencing problems day to day. So I think that was sort of partly what propelled me towards wanting to go to law school. I also worked for some more environmentally focused jobs or internships. So I think I interned for Earthjustice for a semester. I worked for like food justice nonprofit in LA called the Garden School Foundation. I think I originally was interested in food justice issues, and that's sort of what propelled me toward environmental issues. But we essentially got to teach cooking and gardening classes to elementary school students, which was sort of a fun experience, and I don't think I would have had otherwise. I think I also worked for like an environmental research institute on some projects involving food justice and how like behavioral economics decisions are made in like grocery stores in food desert areas. And I also spent a semester in DC working for the Environmental Protection Agency under the former Trump administration. I'm doing more sort of data analytics and sort of economics work. I think it was a really cool experience to sort of see how the scientific aspect of those issues works on the back end. But I think I found that I would rather sort of be doing advocacy work than, you know, more traditional crunching numbers on a computer. And, you know, lawyers are sort of famously allowed to be bad at math. So I figured lawyer was probably a better outcome for me. So I think taking all of those experiences sort of propelled me towards going to law school. And then I applied pretty broadly. U of Chicago was the best school I got into, and I liked the idea of being in like sort of, it felt like Hyde Park was sort of a community, but was like close to a big city with other resources. So I ended up here. So I started law school the year right before the pandemic. So I was a first year in 2019. Pandemic started in 2020, and then the rest of my law school career was like mostly remote, I would say. A little bit hybrid my third year. Excuse me. I think some of the things I enjoyed about my law school experience were, one, the people I met, like some of my current best friends through the law school, all of whom do like very interesting legal work in very different areas to me. Excuse me. I also valued the like environmental focused courses that I took here. I think your first year in law school, most of the time you take the same classes that you would take at any law school. So like torts, contracts, criminal law, the sort of more general basic foundational courses. Your second and third year, you can really choose what you want to take. So usually people take a mix of classes that like help prepare you for the bar exam and classes in areas that you're interested in. So I took most of the environmental courses I think the law school had to offer. Excuse me. And I also did the environmental clinic here at the law school. Clinics are sort of an opportunity for you to get experience doing like real life cases while you're a law student, which I think I really valued. Most of our work when I was, or at least the work that I did while I was at the clinic was sort of in the administrative space, sort of similar to the ICC work we do now. So some of the work the clinic does is representing like low income ratepayer organizations in the state of Michigan for the Michigan Public Service Commission. So we intervened in cases involving utilities to advocate for like lower rates and access to community solar and renewable energy projects and options for energy justice communities around Detroit. I also did a little bit of similar work in the Grand Rapids area. And I think that experience was very valuable as well because you got to like experience what it was like to write like a real brief or, you know, like cross-examine a witness in front of an administrative law judge, and sort of see the practical impacts of your work, you know, happen in front of you. I also think it was like sort of rewarding just from an outcomes perspective because I think we were really the first people to have, you know, like ratepayers who are really impacted by these policies speak in front of the Michigan Public Service Commission and have like their testimony entered about the programs that were like affecting them. So I think from from that perspective, it was sort of gratifying to see as well. And shameless plug, they're still doing that work, so anyone who's interested can talk to, I think Mark Templeton still runs the clinic at the law school. So I think those were the things at the law school that helped prepare me for my career. I also did some environmentally focused nonprofit work before working for AFS. I worked for the Environmental Law and Policy Center my 1L summer. Admittedly, a lot of it was remote, but we did some interesting work in the clean water space around sort of violations around water permits that the Trump administration wasn't prosecuting, essentially. We also did some work in the toxic torts space around misuse of pesticides in agricultural areas, mostly in Illinois. And then we also did a little bit of energy work there as well. And then my second summer, I sort of was between doing another nonprofit or government internship and then working for AFS. I ended up splitting my summer and doing half and half. I think I thought that I sort of had a gap in my resume and that I hadn't really done any private sector work. So initially started at AFS because, or that summer because I wanted to gain experience in a field that was different, and I ended up really liking the work that we did there. And I thought that we had sort of access to resources that you might not get in other places, and I think it was a good opportunity to get experience early on, while also sort of having mentors around you to help you through the process. And then I also liked my experience working for NRTC. I think they do great work there as well. But I think ultimately I liked those aspects of my job working for AFS. And I think, monetarily, obviously, that was helpful to me as well. School is expensive. But that's, I guess, how I ended up here. Both jobs I interviewed with through the OCI program at UChicago, which is usually how it, I think, works for law students. They usually invite sort of large swaths of law firms, I think, to interview students, and you sort of pick the ones that in cities or practice groups that you want to apply to, and then basically go through 3 days of straight interviews with a lot of law firms, and then get callback interviews at the ones that I think are a better fit, and then sort of make your decision from there. But I think ultimately ended up in a place where I could do the environmental energy work that I wanted to do, with the resources at my sort of disposal to get the experience that I wanted at an early stage in my career. So yeah, I think that's a little bit about how I got to where I am now, but I'm happy to answer any questions. Sure.
Did you find that other people who were at the same stage, or maybe that you knew from the environmental clinic, that were in the same stage of their career as you were able to find opportunities to be involved in energy and environmental law in the private sector? It sounds like it was pretty smooth for you, so as smoothly.
Yeah, I think the people that I worked with at the clinic, some of them went private interest or public interest, excuse me. So more traditional NGO work or working for the government, and then some went private sector. I know one of my good friends from the clinic ended up at the same law firm as me and now works for Kirkland. I think another student did, I think, a couple of clerkships before settling into a job and then ended up in the private sector as well. So I think you have to be sort of diligent in what you want. I think if you want to work in the energy environment space, there are certainly law firms that do that. We're an example in the Midwest. There are other firms that have practice group areas that focus on those issues. But I think you have to pick and choose the things that you want for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sure.
Were there any RSOs or clubs that you were involved in that also sort of helped you narrow down your focus or really think about things differently or help in your career at all?
Sure. I think in college I was in the pre-law fraternity, and that I think helped narrow down my focus in law and in talking to other students who were also interested in potentially going to law school. I also did some things I think totally outside of the field. So like sang in choir for a couple of years. I was on the Bollywood dance team, I think, for a year. So I think having sort of outlets to do other things also connected me with students in other areas of campus who may be doing very different things, but also very interesting things. And I valued that aspect of joining other student organizations. There are also environmental law student groups here at UChicago and sort of environmental focus groups, I'm sure, in college. And I think joining EPIC while I was in UChicago, I think helped narrow down my interest in energy for sure.
Can you talk about your experience with EPIC?
Yeah, I mean, I think EPIC was relatively new, I think, when I was a law student, but we had, I think, some overlap in the work we were doing in the clinic and in EPIC. I know there was a lot of work on the social cost of carbon that sort of was collaborated with between both groups. There are also some, I think, excellent speaker programs that helped expose to students to issues different careers, different issues in the environmental space that helped from an education perspective, and also meeting other students interested in similar issues. So, yeah. Sure.
A silly question. I also have a less silly question if you'd rather, but on the silly
all
side,
levels of silliness are happily taken. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Did you take a class in the law school that was sort of environmentally oriented that really stood out to you, or have one professor that really stood out to you? Just wondering, as students, if we can keep our eyes out for that person.
Yeah. I think there were a handful of environmental and energy professors when I was in law school. I think Professor Templeton runs the clinic. I worked a lot with him on issues for the Michigan Public Service Commission work, and I think he's great. Rob Weinstock, who also used to work for the clinic, used to teach classes at UChicago. I think he's at Northwestern now, but he also does really interesting work, especially in the clean water space. I think Professor Kim is still here. I took a climate change course with her and Professor Macy, who I think is now at Yale, but that class I think was really interesting as well. It was a new seminar while I was at UChicago, but one of the best classes I took in my law school experience for sure. I think there are a number of visiting professors, I think, in the environmental space as well. I'm not sure who they are now, but I would look out for those too.
Yeah. Okay, great. Should I ask my non-silly question? How do you see sort of the, the difference in work or maybe efficacy of private sector versus public sector legal work surrounding the climate issue? I know you've experienced both, so do you feel like they have sort of different levels of impact or different specific areas of impact, or different kind of roles they take on?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think both are certainly necessary and serve different functions, but I think in terms of climate change and sustainable growth issues, most things end up being a compromise. So I think really you need both intelligent people on both sides of the coin to sort of get to the best outcome for the biggest group of people. I think it really depends on what you want to do and the kind of work that you want to focus on, I think. I think also maybe sort of the pressures are slightly different depending on where you work. Obviously we have an ethical duty to find the best outcome for our clients, whether that be corporations or whoever. But I think, we have more pressure to maybe lean more conservatively on issues because that's sort of the best outcome for our client. I think there's maybe some pressure on the opposite side if you work in the government nonprofit space, depending on who the administration is or like who your donors are. I think, for example, this is not an environmental example, but we had a case on like book banning legislation while I was a first or second year. I think we represented publishers largely, and that NGOs largely represented, it was I think ACLU who was involved in these cases. And I think they often took stances that were a little bit less conservative and maybe less successful legally because they, not that they're wrong, but they, I think needed to for, funding reasons. So I think just, the pressures to lean different ways are exist on both sides. But I think to the extent that you want to sort of work in the private space in the environmental energy sphere, there is room to do that. I don't think I realized that as much when I was in undergrad and my first couple of years at law school, but I think talking to people who work in my practice group now, I think helped me sort of navigate that transition for sure. Yeah. Sure.
To what degree do you have autonomy over what cases you choose and stuff like that in private practice?
Yeah, I mean, I think to a certain extent, for us, you can choose what practice group you're in.
Yeah.
So that definitely gives you some leeway over the cases that you take. I think obviously there's some pressure to meet your hours. So most people take most cases that are offered to them. I think in the private space, a lot of times as well, when you're a younger associate, you tend to find certain partners that you work with. Sometimes that's just based on who you get along with, and sometimes that's based on the work that they do. It's usually a bit of a mixture of both. So I think most of the time I don't really say no to working with the partners that I like working with. If there are things that are sort of outside my practice area, I usually talk to my practice group leaders before taking on that type of work. But I think you have the of to choose the type of work that you want to do and choosing who you want to work with, what practice group you want to do, and that type of stuff. But I would say we have a little bit less leeway to just say no to things because we don't want to work on them. Yeah, yeah. Sure.
Can you share more about the work about electrification that you mentioned?
About electrification? I think from the work that I've done, at least, most of that has been intervening in Public Service Commission proceedings. So, for example, ComEd or Ameren usually have to file a plan in front of the Public Service Commission for how they plan to effectuate their electrification plans for the next year or couple of years. We represent an organization that represents a number of sort of office building entities in Chicago who intervenes in these proceedings to, I guess, have their experts opine on sort of how those electrification plans would impact their buildings and sort of the best way to implement those so that consumers can have sort of the best access to electrification projects, both building electrification work and sort of electric vehicle stations. So I think that's been, the largest area of our work in that space. But I mean, certainly utilities are doing more work in that space. And I think public service commissions also have a number of stakeholder groups that are aimed at sort of soliciting opinions from different groups about the best way to go about implementing policy towards electrification issues or the generation mix and that type of stuff. So for example, the Illinois Commerce Commission has a stakeholder group ongoing at the moment about sort of the future of gas and the best ways to implement electrification plans while also not sort of increasing the cost to consumers, and sort of the plan for how to continue natural gas in sort of a renewable way and phase it out in the ways that make the most sense going forward. So we have also been like monitoring that proceeding and also taking part in sort of the aspects of it that are most applicable to our client representing the office buildings. But I think that's been sort of the largest electrification focused work. Yeah. Sure.
I guess, where do you see your career evolving? Like, are you satisfied enough with the work you're doing that you want to stay at this firm for many years, or like, are there any goals or directions you could see yourself pursuing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I like personally am happy at my job at the moment, so I don't foresee myself leaving in the recent future, at least. Obviously, life has different plans for many people, and you never really know what will happen. But I like am happy with the work that we do and the people that I work with now, that I don't like foresee myself leaving soon. I think there's a little bit more, maybe less stability if you work for like the government, for example. Like obviously with the most recent administration, there's been less job stability for working for environmental agencies. I think if I were to leave, I think the firm that I'm at probably has the best mix of like an energy environmental work that I like doing in the city of Chicago. So I don't know that I would want to work for another firm. I think if I were to leave, I might like consider going in-house or going back into the NGO space or something like that. But I think I'm currently happy at my current job. Yeah. Sure.
Is there a particular case that you worked on that was like very interesting or taught you a lot that like stands out to you?
Sure. That's a good question. I have one non-environmental case and one environmental case. I think the one non-environmental case was probably the book banning legislation that we worked on. I think that was a good experience because it was like totally outside of my field, but it also like was an important issue to me. That case involved a statute in Iowa where, sorry?
I'm from Iowa.
Oh, yeah. It was in Des Moines, but yeah. A statute in Iowa that like essentially forced libraries to remove books that had any references to like sexual orientation or gender identity or like sex of any kind, which it defined very broadly. Most librarians didn't know how to implement the law, so they like just took out lots of books, regardless of their like literary value, like 1984, Catcher in the Rye, like things you would normally read in English class. So we represented a group of publishers who challenged the law on First Amendment grounds and vagueness grounds. I think that was a good experience because a lot of that happened very quickly. Well, at least like the litigation moved fairly quickly because a lot of it was like in a preliminary injunction posture, which essentially means like you litigate the merits of the case at the beginning. And that one's been sort of up and down between the appellate court and the state court who have had different views on it. But I think that gave me a lot of experience in like what litigation looks like early on because it was a really condensed form of like arguing a case. I think in the environmental sphere, I think the renewables litigation has been probably the most like traditional type of case that we've gotten experience on. And I think that was also a good experience because it also moved relatively quickly. So we got to do briefing on like the merits issues of the case fairly early on. There was some negotiating with the county that I think was interesting to see the back and forth on. Like one of the reasons the county had issued one of the cases denied one of the projects is because they like really wanted a Costco there, but like no one had talked to the Costco. Then we like asked them about it and they were like, yeah, we like kind of aspirationally want a Costco warehouse here, so we're going to deny the project. And then litigation ensued. So that was sort of a fun one to get to to litigate. But that one's up on appeal as well. But I'd say a lot of the work in the environmental space is a little bit less like traditional arguing in front of a courtroom, or it's like cases like Superfund cases that last for 30 years and then there are sort of like spurts of work and then it like dies down for a little bit. A lot more of the work pops up where like a company has a specific question about like a product they want to sell or like a manufacturing practice they want to implement. So I think it tends to be more like issues like that pop up. Yeah.
Could you like walk us through I guess for both for the renewables or for something like what you just said, the latter case, what it would look like from start to finish, like a condensed version of how the project would actually play out?
Yeah. I think all litigation is a little bit different. Usually at the start, like the plaintiff or whoever is suing usually files a complaint where they lay out like the facts of their case and why they think they have like a legal claim against whoever they're suing. So if you're like the plaintiff, some of the initial work happens before that, sort of gathering evidence for your complaint. Once you file it, usually you have to serve it on the defendants, and then they either have to answer it or like explain to the court why they think the case should be dismissed because it's not the right jurisdiction, or they didn't sort of bring a legally cognizable claim on the facts that they said in their complaint. So some cases get dismissed at that early stage. But if you move past that, usually you move to discovery. So in discovery, it's usually you like asking requests of the other side to gather evidence for your case, like deposing witnesses, gathering documents, that type of stuff. So I think some of the works younger lawyers do is, writing motions or negotiating with the other side about what things to turn over, the scheduling for those types of things, like deposing witnesses, and other sort of forms of just like gathering evidence for your case. After that, there's like another period where you can try to resolve the case on sort of like the legal issues. But if there are like factual issues, then you tend to move to trial. After that, usually you get a decision one way or another. It can be appealed, so then you can go through the process of arguing it again on appeal, or it can go back down. I think, and then a lot of cases nowadays settle, so you don't end up going through the entire process. You'll oftentimes will go through maybe the first half of a case, and then the parties will reach a settlement, and it won't eventually get to trial, or it'll get dismissed at an earlier stage. But that's, I guess, the traditional process that like a case would go through the court.
Do you find it being like different in any way, or having like added nuances that come from being more environmental cases?
Yeah, I think in some ways it's like there's nuance. I think in some areas of environmental work, a lot of it is more sort of legal than factual. So you end up doing sort of less of the discovery work, and it's like resolved on sort of like briefing or motions. But in other areas, like for example, like our Superfund CERCLA litigation, I would say that's a lot more fact dependent because it really is dependent on like how much an entity contributed to whatever contamination there is. And a lot of that evidence is like 50 or 60 years old. So a lot of it is like trying to figure out like what actually happened, and the best way to like get the court to apportion costs and that type of thing. And like doing like sort of studies on what the best way of like remediating a site is. So I think it really is dependent on the type of environmental work. But like some cases are very quick, and some are more sort of legal focused, and some I think are more factual focused. It really just depends. Yeah. Sure.
In what ways has AI impacted your work, or like have you seen it impact lawyers generally?
Yeah, good question. I think There's definitely been a push for us, I think, to find ways to implement AI, like obviously in a safe way. I think we have like a form of chat GPT called AFS chat that we can use within the firm that like sometimes I use to help write emails or like write outlines for things, but it's less helpful for like writing briefs. I think some like law firms and law students have gotten in trouble for using AI for writing briefs because it tends to like make up cases that don't exist. But I think there has been like maybe better use for AI in terms of like writing more form documents, like form letters, form contracts, that type of thing. But you still like need someone to obviously review it on the back end. And I think it also is helpful in like reviewing large amounts of documents. For example, we sometimes use Harvey to like organize documents into categories when we like receive large batches of things in discovery. And it's relatively good at like that type of sorting function. We also have used like, there's a program, I guess, called Technology Assisted Review that a lot of law firms have been using when there are like millions of documents that you have to go through, and it's like not really worth it to have people like looking through every document. I think that sometimes helps you narrow down like what things are relevant and what things are not. And I think that has been of increasing use in the legal field more recently. So I think there are definitely uses for it in terms of like reducing the time that is spent on things. I think less useful for things that need like a human touch, obviously. So like I think I'll still be writing briefs, but I may ask Harvey to help me like write emails or sort documents or that type of thing. Yeah, I think there was like a lawsuit filed about it or something. Or like a couple of law firms have been like sanctioned because they just like used AI to write a brief and it like made up case law that didn't exist, and then like they essentially lost the case because they didn't have the legal arguments to back up their case. So it's been a hot topic, I think, in the legal industry recently.
Interesting.
Any other questions? All right, thank you, Meera.
Thanks. I think you have my email. If anyone has any questions or anything, feel free to reach out.